and welcome to a presentation on Catholic collaboration in the Dominican Republic from 1494 to the Treaty of Basel in 1795. When we're looking at the history of the Church within the Dominican Republic, there's maybe three ages we could look at. The first one is from Columbus on through the Spanish colonization. The second is the Revolutionary period, which is actually multiple revolutions, and then it ends with the modern period in the post-revolutionary period, and these are three different times with very different histories. So we're looking here at the very first period. In some ways it is the most simple because you don't have to take in quite as many secular challenges, historical challenges. Revolutions can sometimes be complicated, and in the post-revolutionary modern period, you have quite a bit going on all at the same time. So the earlier period is actually maybe a bit more easy to understand, a little bit like the American Revolution in the United States. It's somewhat easier to study the George Washington period than it is the post-John F. Kennedy period, right? So the first person we're looking at is Fray Bernardo Boyle. He is a Franciscan. He accompanies Christopher Columbus on the second journey across America, the Atlantic, to the New World. So he arrives in 1494. He conducts the first mass held in the New World, and he leaves the Indies after a disagreement with Columbus, and his mission work came to very little. Not a very effective missionary, but he is still in some ways loved. He has statues to him, but not very effective. The fact that he does not agree with Columbus on the way that he's running things is probably a testament to his name, since Columbus doesn't have a very positive reputation as a governor of the West Indies. So to disagree with him is probably a good thing. The next was Fray Ramon Payne. He was a Hieronymite, which is a hermit community, and when Columbus goes back to the courts and starts describing what it's like in the New World, he is influenced to go and to break his hermit life and go and be a missionary. So he goes with Columbus back to the New World. He is a very scholarly person, a scholarly priest, and his role, which Columbus agreed to, was to integrate into indigenous culture, to learn the language, to learn the people, learn their customs. These are the Taino people. This is in the end of the 15th century. He's also goes with some Franciscans, Fra Juan de Duya and Fra Juan Tison, and as well as Mercedarian fathers, Blessed Juan de Solorzano and Blessed Juan Infante. Blessed Juan de Solorzano was the first Catholic priest who was martyred in the New World, so he gets that honor. And Blessed Infante, he is the first person to celebrate Mass in South America. So both the Mercedarian fathers have some influence in the New World, but they start in the Dominican Republic. Juan Mateo and his brother Antón are some of the first converts of Fray Ramón. He convinces Juan Mateo, this is his Christian name, Juan Mateo, and 16 of his family members to convert to Catholicism. Juan Mateo convinces the Taino chief, one of the Taino chiefs, to convert to Catholicism, and out of outrage from some of the other tribal members, they kill Juan Mateo and the family. for their conversion. So Juan Mateo is considered the first Christian convert in the New World and the first martyr. Right? So he's the first Christian martyr in the New World. We don't have a picture or anything of him, being the late 1400s, and they didn't bring a lot of portrait artists with him. And at the time, he probably was not expected to be as well known as he is today. There were more Franciscans coming over at the beginning, even after Fray Boyl leaves and he goes and retires in France. The first things that they do is they start building a monastery in what's now Haiti in 1502. In 1509, they start one in Santo Domingo. You can still see the ruins of it today. That's in the picture above my head. And they also build the first hospital in the New World here in Santo Domingo. They were committed to the defense of the Tiano people, and they created a school for the education of indigenous leaders in their monastery in Haiti, in La Vega in Haiti. All of these buildings were destroyed by the pirate Sir Francis Drake in the battles between Spain and England. They rebuilt, earthquakes, 2 more earthquakes. They rebuilt, and finally in 1930, a hurricane destroyed it again for the final time, and now you just have the ruins. I still think they should perhaps use some government money and to rebuild it. It would be a wonderful museum to Catholic history in the Dominican Republic. It's right in the colonial district, right by the water. Looking at ruins from a distance isn't quite as nice as, if you could walk among them as a museum. I know the OFMs don't have any interest in starting all of this construction again when they have ministry to do other than, religious communities. They have things to do other than to preserve history. They have to live, right? Living ministry for today, for living people, not just in the past. The next group that is worth looking at is the Dominicans. The Dominicans start coming over in about 1509, 1510, around that time period. Fray and Antón de Montesino is perhaps one of the best known Dominicans in the first group of Dominicans to come over. He has a historic defense of the Tiano Indians and the indigenous people of the island of the Caribbean and in the New World. He courageously spoke against the abuses done to the native people on the island, and he made a very famous sermon in 1511 on the 4th Sunday of Advent, which really upset everyone, including Diego Columbus, Christopher Columbus' son, and the rest of the Spanish on the island. He upset them by condemning them in Advent. He was one of the first people to stand up for speaking for human rights around the world. You can see, if you go to Santo Domingo today, this very large statue, the size of a skyscraper, really, not a regular size statue. And this is a piece of his sermon from the 1511 sermon that really upset the Spanish. Tell me, by what right of justice do you hold these Indians in such cruel and horrible servitude? On what authority have you waged such detestable war against these people who dwelt quietly and peacefully in their own lands, wars in which you have destroyed such an infinite number of them by homicide and slaughter, never heard of before? Why do you keep them so oppressed and exhausted, without giving them enough to eat or curing them of sickness? They incur the excessive labor you gave them, and they die, or rather you kill them in order to extract and acquire every gold of every day. Right? You could see how that could upset the people who were enslaving them, right? So this is in 1511. By 1565, all the Tiano have become extinct, from about 40,000 of them down to 1565 there were only about 200 left. So some of this would have been through the cruel treatment and punishment and forced labor, and some of this would have been accidental death due to European diseases coming across the ocean. It wasn't really advantageous for the Spanish to kill the indigenous people because they were their labor, right? It wasn't really a high motivation to eliminate them, but that was the consequence, right? Another notable person, another Dominican, meaning order of preachers, was Father Bartolomé de las Casas. Now, he was one of these encomenderos, which was somebody who extracted gold from the native people, right? Kind of a slave owner, an extractor, right? A colonizer. He was one of them, and he had a conversion in his own life, and he became a priest and eventually a Dominican. He became a Spanish historian, a Dominican missionary, and he tried to expose the oppression of the indigenous people by the Europeans, and he called for the abolition of slavery in the Dominican Republic and in the New World, right? So pretty notable guy. He wrote the bourgeois laws, which favored native people. Unfortunately, these laws were hardly ever followed, and he wrote a number of books, including The History of the Indias, which was printed in 1875, a long time after he had died, and very influential person in the Spanish court. But he didn't, although he tried to stop slavery in the New World, he was ultimately unsuccessful. He has a painting of him among the indigenous people. Usually he's depicted a bit more scholarly, sitting behind a desk and writing, because he wrote so much. Another person was Fray Pedro de Córdoba. He was the first inquisitor of the New World, another Dominican order of preacher in the New World. He was first to denounce the Spanish system known as encomendida, which was this extraction, right? The people of extraction. We might think of them as kind of conquistadors, right? But they're not really exploring at this point. They're settled down and they're extracting, right? So they're the extracting phase of the conquistadors, and he condemns this, right? He condemns this as the inquisitor, right? The representative of the church, the judge. He was against the enslavement of natives in the New World and their abuses. This is an image of him. He came up with 3 declarations. One was, you're an immortal sin if you live in it, and if you die in it. This is to the Spanish who are doing this. He said, in the state you are, you cannot be saved, as your behavior is equal to lack of faith in Jesus Christ, and you have no desire for it. Right? If you are one of these slave owners, slave runners, you are. It's impossible to be saved. This is coming from the Inquisitor, right? This has some influence. He says, if you continue to mistreat the Indians, know for sure that your sins you confess will not receive our absolution. Right? Pretty severe sentence, right? So at this time, even in the very beginning, there was black people from Spain who came to the United States with Columbus. So they were slaves from Spain, and they around this same time period, the first decade of the 1500s, they start importing African slaves. So from 1510, about 1510 to 1502 was the first black slave from Europe brought over. From 1510 onward, African slaves from Africa were brought over, and from 1510 to 1565, it's a transitioning from Native American slavery to black African slavery. So this is all getting condemned altogether, right? When they're condemning the treatment of Native Americans, they're also condemning the treatment of African slavery as well. In this movement, you also have people like Bishop Juan de Valle, who ends up in Colombia, who's condemns slavery, as this is going on in Colombia too. Bishop Domingo de Santo Tomás, is named after Thomas Aquinas, another order of preacher Dominican, is the Bishop of Bolivia, and he's also condemning it there. So this is not an isolated thing within the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Hispaniola area. You're getting these laws brought up in Mexico, Peru, Spain, Bolivia, Colombia, Venezuela, wherever the church is. The leadership seems to be very consistent in the New World. This is somewhat different than in the Church of the United States, right, where this is a little bit more complicated. But in the Spanish world, it's kind of consistent. From these order of preacher Dominicans, the Dominican friars, it comes the Catholic universities. The first Catholic university in the New World is founded by the Dominicans for the education of young people, for new priests, and for the promotion of education in general. Named after St. Thomas of Aquinas. Pope Paul III elevates it to the university status in 1538. The king eventually approves it, I think, in 1558, some years later. The buildings where it was housed is a church, a Dominican priory, which the Dominicans are still in today, the order of preachers. It's very confusing when the religious order is called the Dominicans in the island. The people on the island are called Dominicans, but they were Dominicans. Right. So this university kind of lives on today as the autonomous university, a public school, but it has its roots here in the University of St. Thomas, right? And so we have the first hospital in the New World, the first church in the New World, the first mass in the New World, and the first university in the New World, all coming, and the first cathedral in the New World, all coming from the Dominican Republic. So it has a long Catholic history here, right? Very influential, and it's interesting because the church is consistently opposed to what's going on socially in the New World, but at the same time, they still have power, because the king approved of them, right? The king approved of them, and he didn't outright. The king wanted the gold; he didn't want the slavery. But it's kind of a fake dream to think that you're going to get the gold without it, right? So in some ways, the king causes the problem at the same time. The problem is lived out in the New World, and there's tensions, right? The secular kind of conquistador, gold seeking, and then the church condemning, right? So Fray Gabriel Téllez, who is a Mercedarian, he ends up being another one very critical of colonial policy. And Archbishop Fernando Carvajal y Rivera, another Mercedarian, is the Bishop of Santo Domingo, and he's also very critical of colonial policies and the abuses taking place. So all the way back to the 1400s, 1500s, up through the 1600s, into the 1700s, it's kind of consistently the church is against this abuse of Native Americans and Africans as well. In comes the sisters. We have the sisters communities. What we have at the beginning are the Order of Poor Sisters of Santa Clara, which are the Poor Clares. They're established around 1551. 10 Poor Clares come from Spain, and then 16 people join from the island of Hispaniola, Dominican Republic and Haiti, and Andalusian Dominicans, right, type of order of preacher nuns from 1560. They later become missionaries to Venezuela and Puerto Rico, but they get their start in the Dominican Republic, and they are here as well. At this point, most of the religious sisters would be of European ancestry, right? We're not getting a lot of commingling of one Tiano people are extinct, right? So there's no Tiano people joining. Africans are slaves, so they're not joining because they're slaves. So they're not joining till the revolution and things change. But this is pre-revolutionary period. So you're basically dealing with a white church at this point, trying to minister to everyone, but it's a white church fighting amongst a white church mostly. Once we get into that later post-colonial, post-revolutionary period, you start getting darker skinned people being able to join, and you start getting these mixed races and former slaves and maybe some inbreeding with Tiano people, mixtures of people joining as well. And it's fairly early on, right? It's in the late 1800s when the revolution is over, and things go back to normal and the church restores, and a lot of religious communities come in, and then you start seeing that. But they call them sometimes the Ebony Sisters because they were dark. But we don't have that during this period. We also have the Jesuits. The Jesuits were very important during the 17th century. They came in 1658. They dedicated themselves to education. They started another university, which was very effective. They started missions around the island, especially in poor areas. Most places would be poor at the time, and very effective. But when the Jesuits were expelled from all Spanish territories in 1767, they were also expelled, right? So they were part of the expulsion. And lastly, the last thing to happen in this period before the revolutions and the handing over of land is Pope Benedict XIV in 1741. He promulgates the papal bull Immensa Pastorum Principalis, and it's against the enslavement of indigenous people in the Americas and other countries. So you can no longer, there can be no slavery of the indigenous people. So after this papal bull, things get even more contentious, and what's transitioning at this point is in 1791, the Haitians have a revolution. The treaty between France and Spain gets started, and they're trying to neutralize and balance, try to create peace between Spain and France, and this agreement is created. But the Haitian Revolution does not end until the expulsion of the Europeans in 1805, I believe. And at that point, things start to change again, right? It goes through another period. But that's where we'll end this topic for today, the early history of the Catholic Church within the Dominican Republic. And I hope this is interesting to anyone. I think it is very interesting, especially because we tend to, in the United States, paint the church as colonizers, right? And I think it's important not to consider every European was really a very good Catholic or Christian, because Spanish priests seem to consistently and repeatedly defend the rights of indigenous people, and you see this in the European Catholic defense of Africans and pushing to end slavery as well. The church seems in Europe more consistently slavery compared to the American church, which seems very divided, right? But you ever study the history of the American Catholic Church, very divided on the issue and apathetic. But these types of Dominican and Franciscan priests, Mercedarian priests, they were very actively trying to eliminate the institution of slavery for the Native Americans and keep saying Native Americans. I guess they are in Central America. So Native Americans and African Americans, if we consider Central Americans meaning Central America. Okay, I hope this is interesting for you as well. Okay, have a great day.